modeling the message. To expose false religious leaders, we must first and foremost live authentic lives that demonstrate our faithfulness to Jesus Christ and His message. Here's Gene to explain.
Now, that unfolds here in this passage. Notice in 2 Corinthians 5:1, Paul says, "For we know that if our earthly house, a tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." Going down to verse 6, "Therefore, though we are always confident and know that while we are at home in the body," and that's a very significant statement, because now, as we live, we're at home in the body. But he says we're away from the Lord in the sense that we're not in the Lord's presence. And then he says we walk by faith, not by sight. Yet we're confident and satisfied to be out of the body. What happens when a Christian dies? He leaves this body, this old house that will go back to dust. We are confident and satisfied to be out of the body and at home with the Lord, meaning the presence of the Lord. Therefore, whether we're at home or away, we make it our aim to be pleasing to Him. When I stand before Him, I want to be pleasing to Him, to hear His well done, good and faithful servant. But I want to know that right now. We make it our aim to be pleasing to Him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. And that was a motivating factor for the Apostle Paul. Now, keep in mind that only believers will stand before the judgment seat of Christ. The great white throne judgment is for unbelievers. The judgment seat of Christ is for believers. And we will all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, either when Christ returns to take us to heaven or when we die. Well, actually, we'll appear before the judgment seat of Christ when Christ returns. We're resurrected, so that each may be repaid for what he has done in the body, whether good or bad, namely our rewards. Not salvation, but rewards. And that's what he's talking about. And that was a strong motivating factor. Going on to verses 20-21, therefore we're ambassadors for Christ. In other words, we are willing to endure everything for the cause of Christ. And just as Christ did not think about himself, was willing to go to death to save the world, so we are willing to be ambassadors in spite of the suffering that we're going through. Certain that God is appealing through us, we plead on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. This drove the Apostle Paul. The ministry of reconciliation, to communicate with people they can be reconciled to God, to be at peace with God. He made the one who did not know sin to be sin for us so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Now, what Paul is doing here is contrasting an emphasis on what is unseen with what is seen. What is seen is temporary. What is seen is the old covenant. What is seen is the Mosaic law. And so he says, so we do not focus on what is seen. See, what is seen is the Mosaic law. What is seen is circumcision. What is seen is this earthly life or the earthly promises in the Old Testament. We focus on what is unseen, the eternal, the new covenant, because what is unseen is eternal. Again, we see the motivation of eternity. And so the question is this: why is being an example so important in verifying what we teach and preach? And then secondarily, how does this relate to being a good parent? Well, 1 Timothy 4:12-13, Paul said, no one should despise your youth. And here Timothy probably was in his 30s. Instead, you should be an example. And again, we see that emphasis in the New Testament, an example. Example to the believers in speech, conduct, love, faith, purity. Until I come, give your attention to public reading, exhortation, and teaching. And what gives meaning to public reading, exhortation, and teaching. Someone said, what we are speak so loudly they can't hear what we say. Well, we could also say, what we are enables people to hear what we say because it matches what we are. And so this is a very, very important concept as far as parenting, but also being a Christian generally. And so the subtle message that Paul is sending to these Corinthians is that they want them to contrast his motivation with the motivation of these false apostles. Because these false apostles were focusing on what was seen, not what was unseen. And they were not giving their lives in ministry to those people out of the sacrificial spirit that Paul was doing, not just for the Corinthians, but throughout his missionary journeys.